1963 was the key year of civil rights when King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were moving through the South. There'd been major demonstrations in Birmingham. Many of King's supporters and King himself had been arrested in Birmingham after being sicked on by the racist police chief's dogs and fire hoses. And Mahalia Jackson called and said to Reverend Franklin, we have to help them. Why don't you hold a rally in Detroit? So Franklin started to organize a rally. He was not particularly popular among the black establishment in Detroit. He was considered too flamboyant, too controversial. The Black Ministerial Alliance tried to depose him from leading the march several times. But it all proceeded in the end. Even the NAACP opposed it at first, which in revisionist history they would like not to acknowledge today. But it all started to come together. The mayor of Detroit then was a liberal Irish Catholic named Jerome Kavanaugh, who had been elected in 1961 largely because of the African American vote. His commitment was trying to change Detroit from its unfortunate history of racial violence and tension. In the years before he was elected, there had been a lot of confrontations between the police and the African American community. The tensions went all the way back to World War II, when in 1943, one of the largest race riots in American history happened in Detroit, when many African Americans were coming up to work in the factories, as were whites from Appalachia and the South. And that tension built in fights over housing and jobs, and was one of the sore points in Detroit history, which 20 years later, Kavanaugh was trying to overcome. One of his first moves as mayor was to appoint a progressive police commissioner, George Edwards, who had been trained at the United Auto Workers by Walter Reuther and his brothers as a progressive labor person, who had been active in Detroit politics for a long time, and who was on the Michigan Supreme Court and persuaded to resign from that to take the job as police commissioner, with the single idea of trying to improve race relations in Detroit. So Edwards met Martin Luther King at the airport when he came for the rally. And his first words were, "You'll find no police dogs or hoses here." Detroit was embracing King. They went down to near Wayne State University, where the staging area for the rally. And it was amazing. There were 150,000 people gathered on Woodward Avenue, marching down 8 lanes all the way downtown to the Cobo Hall, where King delivered his first public major iteration of the I Have a Dream speech. He was walking arm in arm with Walter Reuther, the great labor leader of the United Auto Workers, who had really been the banker for the civil rights movement that summer. It was Reuther's money that bailed most of the demonstrators out of jail in Birmingham. It was Reuther who would later help fund the March on Washington. This is 2 months before the March on Washington. And King in Detroit is delivering the I Have a Dream speech there first. And it's being recorded by Berry Gordy of Motown Records, his first spoken word record. Unfortunately for Detroit, although not perhaps unfortunately for the nation, everything was overwhelmed by what would happen in Washington 2 months later. Gordy's record of the Detroit I Have a Dream speech was actually released on August 28th, 1963. So nobody was paying any attention to it because King was delivering his I Have a Dream speech in Washington then. And the rally in Washington was larger than the one in Detroit, so it was basically completely washed out of history. But it happened in Detroit first.